I'm Alison Lampton with the City of Greater Dandenong, and welcome to this very special mini-series crossover of QuickArts and creativeRISE. Let's talk about canvas and linen. There is just something so prestigious with a painting that is actually painted on a linen and a canvas. So commonly today, canvas and linen is actually made by cotton and linen. But a fun fact is the word canvas actually comes from the Latin word cannabis. And that's because hemp historically was always used to make a canvas. Not as common today, although you can still find hemp canvas. Linen and cotton are the two most common fibers that are used to make canvas. Cotton will be the most popular. Usually that's because it is cheaper to actually produce and manufacture, but also it is quite sturdy and strong and stretchy, which makes it really, really good when you want to actually stretch onto a stretcher frame. An early example of canvas being used was in 1485 when Sandro Botticelli painted his Birth of Venus on canvas that was on a board. It wasn't a stretched canvas. It became a lot more common to be used in the 16th century during the Italian Renaissance. Some of the real key advantages to using canvas over the wood panels, which was traditionally used, is it doesn't actually absorb moisture as much and as rapidly as what wood panels do. So it kind of was a little bit more archival, meaning durable to the standard of permanent art. Canvas comes in many different forms, which makes it really, really convenient for the hobbyist, amateur artist, right through to the professional. So some examples that we've got here is a nice, simple, pre-primed, stretched canvas on a small mini board. We've got a raw linen. You can even buy canvas sheets in a canvas pad. These are fabulous if you want to go out on site sketching. You can just pin it or just tape it to a board. It's not really viable for long-term archival art, but for preliminary sketches and to quickly just shove it in the back of a car, they're really, really handy, and they come in a variety of sizes. Now, speaking of the different kinds of linens and canvases and cotton that is around, some of the examples I've brought in here is this is a raw linen. This is a raw cotton. Let's have a look at the colouring. That's one of the easiest ways to actually know which is the main fibre being used. So you've got sort of more like a grey warmth with the linen, and you have sort of more like an orange tawny sort of colouring with your cotton. So they are both raw. If you are buying pre-primed canvas, the best way to know if it is actually linen or cotton, besides the label, is have a look at the back. So this is an oil primed linen, and I can tell because of that real rich warmth colour at the back. This is an acrylic primed cotton canvas, and I can tell that is a cotton because of the actual sort of tawny colouring on the back. There is another test that you can do to know whether you are using a cotton or a linen. I don't recommend you go into a shop and do this, but it's what we call the rip test. Cotton will actually rip really easily. It sort of runs along its fibre weave, whereas a linen won't actually rip. It doesn't make the cotton canvas any less quality, but it is something to be mindful of, that if something does pierce it, it's going to pierce and rip pretty easily compared to a linen. But ripped canvases, let's hope you avoid them, but they can be fixed pretty easily. So you've got pre-primed and you've got raw. You've also got canvas pads and you've got pre-stretched. There is another variety which I don't have here, and it is canvas that is glued or adhered to a flat board. Not a wooden panel, but it's almost like a cardboard. You can get them at some sort of lower end shops that have art supplies in there. But look, my concern with those is because it's more like a wooden surface, it's less like a wooden surface, it's more like a cardboard surface. they are really prone to warping. They just absorb the moisture from the environment, and cardboard gets kind of soggy and loses its integrity pretty quickly. So I'm not saying don't get them, I'm just saying maybe don't think about using them for art that you would like to last and be around for a long time. Quick sketches, great, not a problem. Loose canvas is normally stretched over a stretcher. It can be adhered and pressed down on a solid wood panel, not a cardboard panel. If you would like to know more about how you can do your own stretched canvas, have a look at the link, DIY canvas stretching, and that video will run you through some really lovely hints and tricks as to how you can stretch your own canvas in your own home studio. But if you are choosing to either do a stretch canvas or a canvas pad, raw canvas, canvas on board, however you wish your canvas to come, it does need to be primed. So as I said, you can buy pre-primed linens and cottons, but you can also get the raw stuff. And I will say, before I go into what you need to do to prep your surface, is the advantage of actually knowing how to stretch your own fabric on a stretcher frame and then learning this next bit about how to prime it. You have the advantage that you can actually go a little bit crazy and creative and not just use canvas and linen and the cotton that you can get from art supplies, but go and find your own other materials. So I have found in different assorted shops these other secondhand fabrics and materials that give me a different color and a different texture. And even though it's raw, I know that I can actually stretch this over a canvas stretcher. And I've even got some hessian here. And I can then prepare them the same way I would linen or cotton, knowing that they're actually going to be suitable to then paint on. Some of these materials may not be archival, meaning they're not going to be a permanent fixture of art, but they'd probably still last about 50 years if they're well looked after. So that gives you that flexibility. Check out that DIY canvas stretching video so you know how to stretch your own canvas, any kind of fabrics and cloths. And now let's talk about how you prime it. So before you put any kind of paints on these materials, you actually need to know that the surface is being protected, because what you don't want is paints coming into direct contact with any of these fabrics and surfaces. They're going to be absorbed into that fabric, that canvas, and that can risk your paints looking really dull, and it can also risk your canvas surface being becoming rotted and decaying and moldy. So how do we go about preparing these surfaces ready for your creative artwork? Throughout the Renaissance period, artists would actually go to great lengths to do layer upon layer of their priming to actually cover the texture of their canvas surface. You don't have to do that. If you wish for a really smooth surface, you will just need to do this next process layer after layer after layer. And even if you want to keep some of that texture, I mean, you can sort of see some of the fabric that I've got here, these canvases, the texture and the color is really lovely. Even if you want to keep parts of that, you still actually need to do at least 2 to 3 thin layers of primer and let it dry in between, like dry really well in between each of those layers before your surface is ready to accept a paint application. So I'm going to take you through a couple of the different primers that I commonly use that we've just got here as an example for today. Gesso is one of the most commonly used primers to create a painting ground. It is made currently, it's made by calcium carbonate and a polymer acrylic binder. It used to be made with chalk and resin and adhesives. And a fun fact is gesso comes from the Italian word chalk. Gesso actually now also comes in black, which is brilliant. So if you haven't tried using a black ground to paint over, I really highly recommend you give it a go. Black is quite incredible. It makes any of the colors and tones that you put on top of that really kind of pop. And also, even though it's white and cloudy, this is actually a clear primer. You can also buy oil primers, which are really fabulous for stretched canvas, any kind of material but a stretched canvas, because an oil primer creates a bit more of a sturdy surface. But a word of warning there, if you are going to use an oil primer, please make sure that you have it in a very well ventilated area or do it outdoors. But again, you'll need to make sure it dries completely in between your layers, and each layer could take, 3 to 5, maybe 7 days to actually dry. So it's a longer process, but if you're really, really wanting that extra sturdy surface for your oil paints, try out an oil primer. But for now, let's have a look at these ones. I want to show you the different variation of application and how they look on the different canvas surfaces. I do recommend that you get a nice big wide broad brush. This one's a little bit coarser, but I don't find that it leaves my paint strokes quite scratchy, and this one's obviously a little bit smoother. Even if you have got a canvas that you've bought from a shop and it says it's already primed, I would highly recommend that you always put at least 1 or 2 coats of your gesso or your chosen primer over the top of it, particularly if the pre-primed canvas is a little bit more of a budget canvas. I would almost guarantee you that it hasn't been sealed properly, and you do run the risk of losing vibrancy in your artwork, and you lose the risk of using the black gesso brush with the white, and that gives you grey. So let's swap that out and try the white one instead. I'm going to have to find another black brush. So this has already been primed. We can see that it's not the raw cotton, but running my chosen primer over the top of this, it's going to make sure that my paint is not going to be absorbed into it, or more to the point, my actual paint binder. So in oil paints, you have like an oil binder medium that can get sucked up into that sort of absorbent, porous surface of a canvas. So I would then allow that to completely dry, and I would do 2 more coats on top of that. Another little hint and a recommendation I do have is, before you even start this primer section, put a hanging system on the back. That way, when you are drying it in between, you can hang it out the way. Let's get the black gesso. The process is going to be the same if you're using white or you're using the black gesso. You need to push it into those fibres, even paint around the edges if you would like that black or the white to go all the way around. Really get it in to the weave, and make sure that you let it dry in between each layer. I have heard from some artists that a disadvantage can be with working with like a smooth fibre is that they're not getting the texture that they maybe like. It's different if you are getting a really coarse canvas and you're stretching that and you're using that. But a lot of the raw materials we have are kind of smooth. One way to get around that, you can add your own texture. So if you've got your gesso already a little bit wet, or your chosen primer already a bit wet, grab some tissue paper and stick it down. This is just hand towel, recycled hand towel, and it has almost its own little texture that's come from the manufacturers. You would let that dry a little bit more, but then you can just run your chosen primer over the top of that. So if you apply, my black gesso is a little bit claggy, it's a little thick. You can create your own texture even on a very smooth canvas. even a little bit of household dirt and sand. Again, put it on top of your already wet primer, and then you can go over the top. And this gives a really lovely kind of gritty tooth to your surface. Again, you would let that dry. You would do another layer. If you're happy with the texture, you leave that as it is. If you want more texture, you add a bit more of that sand or that dirt. Alternatively, you can get an impasto product, whether it comes in oils and it comes in acrylics, and you can mix that impasto product, which usually dries transparent, mix it with your chosen medium, that primer that you want for your ground, and then your actual paint marks or your palette knife marks will actually give you the texture that you're choosing. So that is just an example of using an acrylic-based primer, white gesso and black gesso, and also then add in that texture. Again, it'd be easier if I had my hanging system on the back to let that dry, but that's going to give me a nice surface to then paint on top of. Another priming choice is the clear primer. Probably personally one of my favorites, only because I do like to work with different canvases and I stretch them myself, but it's always about trial and error, and it's about your own personal preference. So I do recommend giving things a bit of a try. And if you've got some friends out there that have already got these materials, don't go and buy them straight away. Go and ask your friends if you can borrow theirs. But the advantage of having a clear primer is allowing the actual texture and the colouring of your natural fibres actually to come through. Now it applies sort of like PVA, which PVA can do the same thing, but it's not archival. It's a really cheap alternative, but it does the same thing. So it goes on kind of pasty, but it will dry completely clear. So you would cover the entire surface, and again, you need multiple layers, otherwise it's not going to prepare your surface well enough for you to then put paints on top of. So pretend I've done that whole surface. Once that's all done, multiple layers, letting it dry in between, you end up getting a slight satin sheen. I know this is a very big one. A slight satin sheen to your fabric. So this material has been covered with the clear primer. It's had 2 coats. It does need a 3rd one, and I haven't sanded in between. Some people like to sand in between their coats. I don't sand in between. This is the same material as this one. So it's richer in color, it's warmer, it's darker, but it's still not hiding. So a gesso, for example, will hide that color. A clear primer emphasizes and showcases that. So I hope this quick little video has helped, I suppose, inform you and inspire you to not just buy pre-primed canvases, but to have a play with different raw materials, having a go at stretching your own canvas. There's also a lot of education books and information books on how-to books at the Dandenong and Springvale Library, so I encourage you to go and check out their collection as well. But with all of this new knowledge, go and stretch your own canvas, go and play with some fabrics, and happy arting.